Thank you very much indeed. I'm very pleased to be here. I'd like to commence by saying that I think we need to look at this area from a very sophisticated understanding. I think that once we start talking about simplistic characterisations of the field in terms of legitimate, illegitimate, etc., I think that we're in for dangers. And I think that to really develop some effective regulatory responses, we do need to understand something about the dynamics of stem cell tourism. And that's something I've been trying to do with my colleague Megan Munsey, who's located in Stem Cells Australia. She's in the Education, Ethics, Law and Community Awareness Unit at Stem Cells Australia, which is a multi-university initiative in Australia funded by the Australian Research Council. Since about the end of 2009, Megan and I and a colleague, Kate Sears, left the project, have been undertaking a number of research projects. So it's now nearly 4 years, and this project, which you can find online, was funded by the Department of Innovation, Industry, Science and Research, a small study involving interviews with 16 patients or carers who'd been overseas for treatments, mainly to China, to India, and to Germany, the Excel Centre, which has since been closed, and we've heard a little bit about that this morning, and subsequently we were building on that through this Australian Research Council funded project, a 3-year project which commenced last year. We're almost at the mid-term mark. It may go into the 4th year because it's quite a complex project. It involves a number of dimensions. I'm leading the project, but there's other partners involved. As I say, Megan's someone that I'm working with very, very closely. Claire Tanner is the postdoctoral researcher, and she'll be hopefully going to India next year to do some field work, and Germany as well. Jane Coty at the bottom there is the PhD student. We managed to lever in some funds through a generous donation from a private benefactor, and she's been in China during the last month, laying the groundwork for some field work which she'll be undertaking towards the end of this year, what's left of the year, and then early next year. So she's coming back briefly and then going back to China. It's not easy accessing the clinics and hospitals in China, as you might imagine, so there's quite a lot of preparatory work that needs to be done. She's locating herself at Peking University in order to do that. So the project involves a number of aspects. Project's called High Hopes, High Risk, Sociological Study of Stem Cell Tourism. I should point out I'm a qualitative sociological researcher. I'm not looking at large data sets. We're mainly talking to patients. We're going inside the clinics, hopefully, to undertake this research. We're looking at online materials, as mentioned here, and also trying to translate the findings into practical strategies. And as I said, the impression so far from having worked in this field for about 4 years is that we do need a sophisticated understanding. And I just really must emphasise that if we have a simplistic characterisation of the field, and even of providers, I think that we are in danger of going down a regulatory response which may not be effective. I'll talk a little bit about that as we go on towards the end, but I just wanted to introduce you to some of the findings from the study so far. I've been given a series of questions to address today, so I thought I'd use these as trigger points so we can keep on track and make sure that we can present all the findings within the designated amount of time. I've been asked how many patients travel. I think it's extremely difficult to get an accurate picture at the moment. There's no formal registry or any other measures to monitor this phenomenon. In an ideal world, I suppose we would have this. I don't know how we would realise it. I'm not sure how we would monitor such a registry. I mean, it's difficult enough with clinical trials, as we know, but to actually do it with this in terms of patients who are operating pretty much in a deregulated market and where treatments are advertised directly to consumers via the internet, it's a very complex field. The information is based upon anecdotal reports from clinicians, scientists, patient groups who are approached by patients or carers about stem cell treatments. We've talked to 20 what we've called stakeholders, clinicians, scientists, representatives of patient groups, etc., about their engagements with patients, and we're getting some very interesting findings, and I could talk about that, although this is not the context to do it. Maybe we'll have time during the break. But people are saying to us, well, we may get sort of like a dozen inquiries a year. Some groups are saying, well, we have hundreds of inquiries a year. The Australian Stem Cell Centre received about 500 inquiries per year before its closure in June 2011. This was superseded by Stem Cells Australia, and I confirmed this with Megan only yesterday, that they have around 400 inquiries per year, but not all for overseas treatments. So I'm sorry I can't be any more specific than that, but this is the picture at the moment. Where are they coming from? Mostly developed countries. It's difficult to ascertain again. However, there's some evidence to suggest the majority travel from developed to developing countries. The websites advertising stem cell treatments and the blogs of patients who receive treatments at these clinics indicate a preponderance of clinics in Asian countries, particularly China and India. We've heard some about this from Tim's talk. He's done probably most research in Douglas Sipp, who I believe is somewhere in the audience at the back. Also Central America and Caribbean countries. But stem cell providers are offering treatments in some developed countries as well, exploiting regulatory loopholes. For example, in the US, some patients from our ARC study, in fact, are coming to the US. They're finding out through the internet that there are trials being undertaken, and then talking to the scientists, and scientists saying, well, actually, we can treat you outside the trial. So I think that this has raised some very interesting questions. There is also some Australian providers. Macquarie Stem Cells, quite prominent. The Adult Stem Cell Foundation. There's a new outfit called Stem Cell Treatments Australia. I confirmed if they're still online. Interestingly, they went offline yesterday. They had, I thought, an outrageously exploitative advertisement that was online last week. I don't know whether there's been a complaint made and they've withdrawn it, but I challenge you to just keep an eye on that one. Stem Cell Treatments Australia. Some dental clinics. My partner had a wisdom tooth extracted. She was offered autologous stem cell treatments to help with the healing of the wound. I didn't even know about this, and Megan didn't know anything about it until my partner had this wisdom tooth extraction. Sports clinics, anti-ageing treatment clinics. I've just received another grant from the Australian Research Council to explore the anti-ageing treatment markets. I'll be very interested in this space as well. So we can see that if we're talking about stem cell tourism, it suggests that there's sort of an outward movement of patients. A lot of these treatments are now being offered. These autologous stem cell treatments are being offered onshore, and I'm talking from the Australian perspective at the moment. So I think we need to think clearly about the language that we're using. I think the term tourism is quite problematic too in this context, because tourism suggests recreation, sun, sand, etc. But people are not going for this kind of intent. We talked a little bit about some of these providers. Bakey Biotechs, I can't talk about all of them. I've done some research myself with Megan and Kate Sear a few years ago. We've published that in New Genetics and Society, end of 2011, which was a qualitative study of some of these websites. Very positive portrayal, very much reinforces what Tim was saying earlier. Not much evidence to support the claims that are being made. Very strong reliance on patient testimonials. I think this is a very much used method for in this persuasive form of advertising. Has a very long history in advertising, incidentally, as well, but not much hard clinical evidence. In Australia, we've got, as I mentioned, Macquarie Stem Cells with claims such as this: revigorate your life with stem cell therapy. Seems to be no regulation around this happening whatsoever at the moment. And Adult Stem Cell Foundation with the claim here that adult stem cell therapy is available now, with an exclamation mark, in Australia, New Zealand, Asia and Pacific, Rim, China and Italy, and the potential use of stem cells outlined in that illustration there. So again, one would gain the impression from looking at these sites that one can gain stem cell therapies for almost any condition. So why do patients seek these therapies? What drives their decision making? I think this is very complex. There are various reasons, but underpinned by the hope of what stem cells offer and the desire to exhaust all options, particularly the case with parents, but also common to adult patients. There's certainly a disillusionment with current available medical care. They see patients generally see limited treatment options. They've been down all the treatment paths. They've gone around the medical merry-go-round, as it's sometimes called. They've hit a brick wall. You might say they're desperate. I think talking about the language of desperation in a way, in some cases, simplifies things because it implies kind of a lack of. I think it can be seen to imply sort of, in some cases, a lack of agency and a lack of due consideration to all the risks. But I would like to suggest that patients often bring with them lay conceptions of risk. They have a different approach in the situation which they're confronted. There's often an absence of strong dissuasion from clinicians or others. The study that I mentioned, the 20 stakeholders that we talked to, and we're still analysing that data, produced some very interesting observations in this regard. Most of them, they didn't use the language of non-directive advice, but basically they were saying, look, we're not going to dissuade people from going. We don't believe these therapies work. We think there are a lot of charlatans out there. We think there's a lot of these treatments are dangerous. They haven't been properly proven. But we don't want to dash people's hopes. We want people to keep their hopes alive. So they're in a sense managing patients' hopes. And this is one quote, for example, from a patient interviewed this year, a parent with a child with cerebral palsy. They spent $130,000, incidentally, on 3 trips, 1 to Germany, 2 to China. And when I'm saying $130,000, it's not just for the treatments, it's for the hotel expenses, it's for the airfares, etc. The neurologist wasn't totally against it, but he was definitely not recommending. This is quite common, coming through in a number of the interviews, actually. But when we were keen to, when he realised we were going to do it, then he was very interested in finding out and looking at doing MRIs before we went, MRIs when we came back and things like that, etc. Some of the doctors did say this, we just want to check it out, see how it goes, do a monitoring exercise before and after. There's often strong support from families, patient groups and communities. Many of the patients we've talked to were in communities which were involved in fundraising efforts. This is what made the trips possible. And I'd suggest that the findings that we have are biased in a sense that some of those who have had unsuccessful journeys, their hopes weren't fulfilled, perhaps are not letting that be known. They're embarrassed about it. In fact, I met someone not too long ago who'd been to India and felt that he was a fool for having gone, and he'd want to make that generally known, which is quite understandable. So the context of decision making, as I said, I think we need a complex portrayal of this area. I'm very interested in the more theoretical aspects and understanding some of the dynamics. I think we need to understand the politico-economic context in which decision making occurs. And we, of course, have a deregulated system, a global context of healthcare system, where people can basically seek treatments wherever they're available. We've got a 24/7 type of care, and there's certainly very strong belief in societal and personal benefits to be derived from investment in biomedical science and treatments. And new forms of citizenship, some in sociologists call this a biological citizenship, centred on the promises of biomedicine. This applies to genetics, personalised medicine. I think if we look at stem cell treatments, it's just really a subset of a whole range of different treatments that are available in the medical place. And I think we need to look at stem cell tourism within the whole health and medical tourism industry, which is supported by many constituencies, including, interestingly, the World Health Organization. Next year I'm going and spending some time at the Brochure Foundation in Switzerland, and I've been invited to give a talk to the World Health Organization. And the World Health Organization, I don't know if you're aware, have come out with a number of reports on health and medical tourism, and see this as a potential contributor to the economies of developing countries. There are many bio-industries which stand to benefit from this area, and many governments, Australian government has looked into the economics not of stem cell tourism but of medical tourism. Singapore has, I think Japan has as well. So I think we need to keep this in mind. So when we focus too much on the individual decision making, we can overlook this broader context in which decisions are made. In Australia, and this only happened in the last month, NIB Health Fund has offered medical tourism. The healthcare sector is set for a massive shake-up, the article says, with insurer NIB planning to sell offshore surgical packages to Australians who want the cheaper prices offered by Asian medicos, but with guarantees about safety and quality. If you look down to the last paragraph, they're going to start with cosmetic and dental tourism and then potentially move into other areas. I think in the US, and some people here would be better informed than myself, I think the insurance industry here is also very interested in marketing medical tourism. Tim talked about hype. I think we have to accept that scientists themselves often hype the significance of their work. Jane Mainsheim, in an article a few years ago, talked about the strong translational ethos that pertains to the stem cell field. Many new areas of biomedicine have a translational ethos. There's a very strong one in stem cell science. Scientists have to promise up front what the implications of their work are often and hype the significance of their work. So I think there's certainly a management process going on here where scientists, and I've heard scientists say to me, both in the nanotechnology field, where I've done some work in the stem cell field, that we need to keep this, this expectation, this optimism alive, but not overhype, and that's the term that's used, overhype the field where people have unrealistic expectations what are going to be delivered. We see one estimate, for example, of predicted growth in the market from $26 billion US dollars in 2011 to 119 billion in 2018. I think the statistics themselves are part of the hyping. Internationally, many clinical trials involving stem cells are currently recruiting. We saw some figures early, 4,000 odd, but it's actually 1,715 currently recruiting. That's the term that's used in November 2013, about half of which are in the US. And of the rest, about 2/3 in Europe. However, the majority of these trials are at very early stages of translation, focused on safety with low intake numbers. So phase 1, I presume, or that sort of level. How do patients learn about these clinics? Well, word of mouth. Work colleagues in some cases. Some of the patients we're talking to, colleagues said, well, I read something in a newspaper article or a magazine. Why did I explore this? Patient groups are a key source for information. Newspaper coverage of scientific advances. And I've done some of this work myself, and Tim's done a considerable amount of work, and Douglas Sipp and others, where there's certainly a very positive framing of stem cell research, as there has been with genetics in the post-genomic period, where there's stem cells are going to solve X, Y, or Z problems. We constantly see these sort of stories in the papers. I've been collecting some myself. Internet search is key for most patients. And I had a number of these, and I've just cut it down to one. In 2008, I started investigating because there are no known causes. There are no cures for motor neurone disease, so I thought, oh, I better start to learn about it. So I really basically got on the internet myself and started investigating possible alternative methods than mainstream medicine. Many such stories amongst our patients. The internet is key here. Are patients more willing to tolerate more uncertainty than national regulatory bodies? I'd say yes, although Australia's current regulatory position with respect to autologous therapies is surprisingly lax, as I've mentioned. There's a regulatory black hole here. And I think we also need to acknowledge that patients have different conceptions of risk, lay conceptions of risk, as it's referred to in sociology. Now, I think impressionistic information often plays a role, going through early contact with providers, such as Harry, the child with cerebral palsy, mentioned. We did do a trip before we went, a trip before the trip where we had the treatment, a reconnaissance trip, in other words, and this is quite common amongst patients. They'll go overseas, check out the clinic, get some impressions, then decide they'll go. This is all part of the expense as well that comes into the calculation. We went there and we visited the place, spoke to a doctor and asked various questions. I think going there and seeing the place was convincing. Well, not convincing, but it was like, oh yeah, this is a good place. Simple as that, in some cases. What's the patient experience during treatment? Positive for many participating in the interviews. It gave them hope. Hope has become a key organising concept in the study that we're undertaking. It's coming through very, very strongly in patient narratives. Hope, not just the language of hope, there's a whole rhetoric around hope which is being generated through online advertising. We're very interested in the political economy of hope, a term that might seem very odd to you. It's been used by Nicholas Rose Carlos Novus, originally used by Mary Jo Delvecchio Good in relation to cancer treatment back in 1990. In our Hopeful Journeys study, most respondents reported some benefit from an initial treatment. After that, some people said they didn't have any further benefit. But this initial positive experience is leading some patients to have a second and third trip and sometimes people are going to India 2 or 3 times. However, the improvements are not clinically verified. We know of some Australians who have not had the experience they were hoping for. So, and I think that this may be a difficulty of getting some people to get them to recruit in our study. The numbers have dropped off. So far, we've interviewed 29 patients, 13 who have actually been overseas, 16 who have contemplated having the treatments but decided for one reason or another not to travel. And we could go into that and during the treatment, during the break, if you like. As I said, the significance of hope, very strong in the patient narratives, as in a few examples here. Improved eating and drinking gave me more confidence and hope. We're still holding high hopes that stem cell therapy could be the answer for something like, child's condition. And we think this is very much also an aspect of active citizenship, being seen to sort of be doing something and trying to realise that hope, which I should emphasise is different from expectation about a specific outcome. I think we need to be very clear here. Conceptually, we can distinguish between expectation of a particular outcome and having a hope. Hope in itself has become a kind of resource, and I think providers are very, very aware of this. They're marketing hope. That's what they're doing. That's what they're offering, is they're marketing hope. However, the hopefulness expressed by these individuals differs from the hope that is generally described in clinical text. I think I might be just about reaching the end of my time, and we're near the end here, but I just want to say that over the last 2 or 3 decades, if one looks at the health literature, there's been a burgeoning of literature on hope and the development of hope scales, for example, Snyder's hope scales, Herb's hope scales, efforts to measure hope. Hope is seen as having some clinical significance. It can help people get better. It can have some physiological effect. David Groupman's book, for example, The Anatomy of Hope, talks about the significance of hope in clinical practice. However, the hopefulness expressed does differ from this form of hope, namely belief in the therapeutic benefits derived from positive thinking. None express miraculous recovery, none expected miraculous recovery following treatments. Rather, they look forward to and endeavour to achieve small yet significant improvements, such as Marion here, and I interviewed her herself, so I never thought it was going to be a miracle, and people who go to that thought in mind are going to be disappointed every time. I'll just flick through here, and there's a few other slides because we're running out of time, but people did have contact with local doctors before they went, and they generally weren't dissuaded by their local doctors. They also had, as I mentioned, pre-treatment visits to providers. And just finally, I should mention here, what's the patient perspective on the efficacy of treatments is something I was asked to address as well. Are patients satisfied? All the respondents from the Hopeful Journeys study reported benefits from, as I said, an initial treatment, such as a stabilisation of the patient's condition, a minor improvement in physical function. Sometimes there are actually more substantial improvements than that. But in many, if not most cases, people reported a feeling of being pleased that at least they tried it, they gave it a go, and that was better than not doing anything, being passive, if you like. They also had views, also explored views on patients' understanding of the sources of stem cell, and respondents generally exhibited little knowledge about the sources of stem cells used in treatment. They didn't have much sense at all of where they came from, how they were stored, the protocols that were used and described by John earlier, for example. And so in conclusion, we could say that really hope is a key factor in patients' experience, and I think we need to really understand how this operates in the healthcare marketplace, where hope has been symbolically mobilised by the biotech industry and by providers who stand to benefit from stem cell treatments. However, this does not equate with the sort of hope that you often see in clinical practice, and respondents are not expecting miracles from their treatment, but rather hope for small, yet to them significant improvements. And some were saying, well, look, I've got some restoration of my continence, which I didn't have before. I can now wiggle my toe. I couldn't do that before. For example, I've got more confidence than I had. I can travel overseas. These are very subjective forms of assessment. They're not things which, in the clinical terms, would be seen as a restoration of function. But often, there's considerable financial outlay involved, time away from work, family, other costs, and potential long-term physical harms which have been outlined in the literature. And 2 reported deaths at this point. And just on this final slide, I'd like to emphasise the limits of responses, which are based upon the informed consumer model. I don't think the provision of information alone, just saying don't go, and as this International Society of Stem Cell Research has said, things that you should know, questions you should ask before you go. Patients are doing this, but that's not the only form of information that they're relying upon. It's not the only thing which influences their decision making. The House of Lords last year, in fact I was asked to make a submission to the House of Lords inquiry into regenerative medicine. The timing didn't quite fit, but I was very disappointed in the outcomes of that. If you look at their recommendations in relation to what they call regenerative medical tourists, basically it's just saying go to ISSCR's website, talk to your doctor before you go overseas, and that was about it, in about a very short paragraph, so I thought it was quite a limited form of response. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm sorry if I've gone over time.